Super Mario Maker 2's 3D World style is pretty lacking when compared to the main 4, that's certainly no secret at this point. One of the main reasons that this style is, in my opinion, much worse than the others is because of the lack of useful items that are present in the main styles. Now sure, 3D World did get several unique elements to make up for that, but for the most part, these aren't nearly as impressive as the items in the main styles. With that said though, not all of the items that aren't in the 3D World style really need to come over. So today, I want to take a look at the 39 items not in the style and discuss which I think should come to the style in a possible Mario Maker 3. We'll be placing these items into a tier list. The top tier are the items that definitely should have been there from the start, and the bottom tier are the items that I really could care less about. Or in other words, that's the tier that Nintendo will probably go with. Oh, and also I'm only going to be covering items that are in all of the main styles. Stuff like style exclusive power-ups won't be mentioned here. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's take a look at our first element. We'll go in order based on the element selection wheel, which means our first item for the terrain category is the spike trap. Now I know what you may be saying, 3D World already has the spike block, however these items are so radically different that I feel like I need to talk about them. For starters, the spike in the main styles is 1x1 tile big. This is very helpful as that makes it just about as flexible as an item can be, however in 3D World, their spike block is 2x2 tiles. That makes it significantly more difficult to work with, but on top of that, instead of just being a simple damaging hitbox like the main spike trap, the 3D World element has 3 variations. One that cycles on and off on a set timer, and a red and blue variant that only have the spikes active depending on the state of an on-off switch. Now yes, this mechanic is pretty cool, but without having the basic spike block, this could be very tedious to try and use. Honestly, my suggestion here would be have the spike from the main styles be added to 3D World, but also add on the functionality of the spike blocks. Then there would be a way to have a constantly damaging 1x1 hitbox without having to worry about on-off switches, and you can still have the fairly unique mechanics of the spike block from 3D World. So for the tier list, I'm gonna place this in the second tier. It's definitely an item I'd like to see, but since there's sort of a replacement for it, there are more items I'd like to see come first. One element down, 38 more to go. Here, let's cover our next 2 items together, the bridge and the mushroom platform. These basically just act the exact same as semi-solid platforms, where you can stand on top of them, but also jump through them from the bottom. Obviously, 3D World already has the semi-solid, a really terrible version of it, but they have it nonetheless. So mechanically, these 2 items aren't very interesting. Their main use though is to help a level aesthetically, and I think they're both pretty helpful at that. Considering 3D World really doesn't have any aesthetic elements at all, these would be a nice addition. It'd help make levels in the theme look a bit more distinct from each other, but with that said, they aren't very necessary additions. I'll be putting them in tier 3, certainly something I'd like to see, but I'm not crying about them being gone either. Our last item from the terrain menu are the note blocks, and I guess by extension, the music blocks. These have a number of different uses, namely being able to jump off of them like a spring, and they can also contain items that can be spat out like a question mark block. Now those uses can be replicated by other items. Like I said, springs can be used for the bounce part, and the question mark block can be used for the container part. However, what makes the note block especially useful is that anything can activate them. No matter what lands on top, it will cause the block to spit out its item, which is not something easily replicated by anything else. Plus, it's a lot easier to work with than springs sometimes, as you don't have to worry about gravity or the player picking it up. Plus, the music block can also be used to make music levels. Wow, that was a banger. So I think it's fair to put this just above the spike trap in tier 2, something that would again be useful to have, but there are still a few more deserving items. With that said, we've knocked out the terrain pretty quickly. Let's jump to the next tab, the items. This tab only has 3 elements for us since a majority of it is made up of style exclusive power-ups, which I said I wouldn't be covering. First off, we have an item that's actually an alternate form of an item in all styles, that being the frozen coin. This is obviously a coin trapped in ice that can be freed when it comes in contact with fire. There's really nothing like this in 3D World. I guess the closest you could say would be a bomb, but that definitely lacks the simplicity of a frozen coin. Despite that though, the frozen coin isn't really the most helpful item in the game. Sure, it can be nice to make fire detectors or block something off until the player gets a fire flower, but other than that, I think we can get over this one not being present. I'll place it in tier 3, still above the bridge and mushroom since it is mechanically unique, but not much higher. The rotten mushroom acts as the alternate form of the 1-up in the nighttime version of the ground theme in the main 4 styles. But time sadly doesn't flow in 3D World, so we never get to see any nighttime versions of any theme. The rotten mushroom is able to follow the player along the ground and even jump up a few blocks, making it a fairly interesting obstacle. It's a bit more of a gimmick though that works on its own, rather than something like the note block or spikes that can be helpful in several different level types. So for that reason, I'm gonna place it in tier 3. Definitely still something I'd eventually like to see, just not something I care that much about. Our final item though sort of breaks the rule of needing to be in every style, but I wanted to talk about the Goomba shoe / Yoshi regardless. These both give the player a way to ride something around a level, whether it be a shoe or Yoshi. These are mechanically pretty different, but I'm not gonna go over that, just because I don't think they'd add either of these two since they weren't present in 3D World. I'm using this slot as more of an empty one just to say that they should add something to ride in this style. Oh wait, they do have something, the Koopa Troopa car. Too bad it sucked. But yeah, since they do technically have a rideable item here, I guess I'll place this at the bottom of the 3rd tier, since I would still like for them to add something a bit more exciting. But with that said, it's now time to look at our by far biggest section, the enemies. Starting off, we have the alternate form of the Goomba, the Goombrat. These act the exact same as Goombas, but they just don't walk off ledges. Very smart of them. This tiny alteration is actually very helpful for making your levels just the way you want them to be. Obviously though, since we're talking about them, they aren't in 3D World. There's not really a good replacement either, which is a massive shame. Sure, this isn't the most helpful item on the planet, but I would still really be happy to see it, so I'm gonna put it at the very bottom of tier 2. Another pretty basic enemy are the Buzzy Beetles, which pretty much just act the exact same as Koopas, but they do have a few unique attributes. For one, they wouldn't be kicked out of their shells like Koopas when you hit them, and secondly, they can climb on the ceiling and drop down onto players. While not really the most useful gimmicks, they're still better than nothing, so I'll put this in tier 3. But we're not quite done with the Buzzy Beetle just yet. While sure, the default form of the element is solid, its alternate form is one of the best items in the game, the Shellmet. While we're at it, we might as well go ahead and cover the Spiny Shellmet and Drybones Shell too. Drybones for Smash. These items' primary uses are as power-ups, allowing Mario to wear them and be protected from the top in the case of the first two, or be able to ride through dangerous liquids in the case of the Drybones Shell. Now those uses are pretty nice, but the main reason these are so loved is because they're shells. That means they can be kicked along the ground in order to kill enemies, collect things, and most importantly, activate blocks. This is super useful in a number of different situations, stuff like making timers or really any complex contraptions. The fact that 3D World doesn't have any placeable shells is really holding it back. Luckily, it does have spike balls which can be used for some of the same uses, but shells would be a lot better. Even if they just add placeable Koopa shells, I'll be happy, but as it is, these really need to come over. All 3 of these get to be in the top tier. I don't want to hear any arguments in the comments, these are just way too useful. On the other side though, the spike tops are pretty much useless. Okay, well that's not a good way of putting it. They can be decently helpful in the main 4 styles. They basically will crawl on any surface they come into contact with, including walls and ceilings. Well, that is certainly pretty neat, and troopers exist in 3D World and do the exact same thing. They even have a form with a spike on it. So yeah, the spike tops would be a pretty useless addition. I'm gonna be putting them at the very bottom of the list. Another boring enemy is the Blooper Nanny. Basically, this will just have several smaller bloopers following the main blooper, which Mario can jump on. This is really not useful at all. I only remember this thing exists because of enemy spam levels, so even though there's really no equivalent in 3D World, I'm gonna put this at the bottom too. Okay, we've been on a bit of a bad streak. Luckily though, our next enemy is actually a really useful one, that being the Muncher. Essentially, Munchers act the exact same as spike traps, but with the ability to be killed by POWs, and more importantly, are able to be moved by gravity. They can even activate things like P-switches as well, meaning they're incredibly helpful in making contraptions. There's really no replacement for them in 3D World at the moment either. There are several elements that take parts of being a Muncher, such as a piranha plant staying still in we're in Mario World. Such as a piranha plant staying still and moving by gravity, or the Thwomps being able to activate P-switches, but it's the combination of all these parts together that make the Munchers such a useful element. I'm going to be placing it at the very top of the 2nd tier. I still think the shells are a bit more needed, but the Munchers would certainly not be an element I'd complain about. Time for the moles. Monty Mole is able to bury itself in the ground and pop out after a while. It's also able to follow Mario very quickly. There's not really an enemy quite like it in 3D World. However, it's not missing out on all too much. It's just a simple variation to a basic enemy to help spice up your level, so I think putting it just above the bridges and mushroom platforms in tier 3 makes the most sense. Similar story for Rocky Wrench. It pops out of the ground and throws a wrench at a random height. This is once again just another enemy that's used to spice up some levels, but isn't really necessary for any sort of machinery. I do think it's a bit more unique than the Monty Mole though, so I'll put it right above it. Our next enemy is the Chain Chomp, which will stay in place and lunge towards the player, or hop along the ground if their owner forgot to put a post. Like the last two, this is just an enemy that's not too terribly useful in anything other other than just being an enemy. I'll put this above Rocky Wrench though because dogs are awesome. For a less useful enemy, we have the Wiggler. Its main gimmick is that it'll be calm before Mario jumps on it, causing it to seethe and mold, just like you all do when I say Mario Galaxy sucks. You can't jump on the Wiggler to defeat it either, instead causing Mario to just bounce off of it. Unlike the last few enemies though, this does have a pretty decent equivalent in 3D World with the Ant Troopers once again, since you can't jump on them to defeat them. Plus the anger mechanic isn't really groundbreaking enough for me to want to place the Wiggler any higher. For that reason, it's going to be in the bottom tier, though I do still like it better than the Blooper Nanny and Spike Tops. The Boob Buddies are a ring of 8 boos that Mario has to go through by going through the gap in the ring. While this is certainly an interesting obstacle, it's not one that's incredibly necessary. Plus 3D World has the Peepas, which are also ghosts that go in a circular motion. While there is only one of them, Peepas are significantly more awesome. I'll place the Boob Buddies at the very bottom of the 3rd tier, since I do still think they are a bit more interesting than the 3 at the bottom. For the Koopalings, I've decided to combine them all together since they would obviously have the same reasoning. Same goes with Bowser Jr. Once again, I'm using this spot not to talk about the item in question, but more so what type of item it is. That of course being bosses. 3D World is severely lacking in them, especially good ones because 2 out of 3 of them are basically worthless. All it really has right now is Boom Boom, and that makes levels a lot more boring in this game style than the others. Sure, bosses aren't something every level needs, but they certainly don't hurt to have. Now, I don't think the Koopalings themselves will come since they obviously weren't in 3D World, but there are plenty of other relatively simple bosses they could have added instead. I'm going to be placing these guys representing more bosses in general in the 2nd tier. Back to enemies that are just interesting obstacles, we have the Mecha Koopas. These will get knocked down if jumped on and can be thrown at other enemies to defeat them. There's also the Zappa variant for lightning and Blasta variant for missiles. Due to the higher amount of variations than the other similarly useful enemies, I'm going to be placing these above them in tier 3. Now for an enemy that is really interesting to talk about, the Angry Sun. Now in normal gameplay, it's pretty basic, just swooping down at the player every once in a while and staying on screen once loaded. It's pretty niche by itself, so I would have likely put it in tier 3. However, there's an interesting quirk with this. See, its alternate form is the moon, which will not only change its behavior to killing every enemy on screen when touched, but it will also transform the level into nighttime. Now this isn't the only way to make a level take place during the nighttime of course, but I'm assuming if the Angry Sun and Moon were added to 3D World, it'd bring nighttime themes as well. This would massively help keep 3D World levels fresh. It would basically double the theme count, even if some of the nighttime themes kind of suck. If we're looking at it that way, the Angry Sun gets to be in top tier, but keep in mind, it's only if it brings over the nighttime levels with it. Otherwise, it'd be at the bottom of tier 3. Laka II is another enemy that stays on screen with the player, though he of course throws down items of the creator's choice. This is a pretty good and unique gimmick, though it is once again hard to work with in a level where it's not the main focus. One thing about the Laka II that's more helpful though is its cloud. After murdering a Laka II or simply erasing it from existence in the maker, you'll be left with its cloud, which can be used to temporarily fly around. This is pretty useful in the main 4 styles, though it would be even more so in 3D World as there aren't many good flight power-ups. The Bullet Bill Mask and the Propeller Box are really the only ones, but neither of them give you quite the amount of control that the Laka II cloud does. So with that said, I'm going to be placing this at the top of tier 3. Why not tier 2? Well, that's because our final enemy is a much better flight item, that being the Clown Car. This lets you fly infinitely, and its alternate form can even let you shoot out fireballs, leading to entire level genres about flying and avoiding obstacles. Also, I haven't been considering how useful any of these enemies would be with stacking since 3D World is super awesome and decided not to have it, but I think riding in a Clown Car is a bit different, and in that case, the Clown Car also lets anything control it, which can lead to some fun combinations. So this one is definitely a tier 2 item. I'm going to be putting it below the bosses since 3D World does have 2 decent flight power-ups already, and the bosses are way worse off in that department, but I'd be happy to see the Clown Car either way. That brings us to the end of the enemy section though, so now it's time we look over at our final tab, the gizmos. Now just because we're done with the enemies, doesn't mean we're done with stuff that can kill you. Starting off, we have 2 fire gizmos, the burner and fire bar. The burner will periodically turn on and off with the fire pillar, and the fire bar will spin its bar around it. These are both decent obstacles for traditional levels, though they're once again fairly difficult to use in any sort of contraptions, especially without frozen coins. Still though, I think castles could really use some more fire related obstacles that aren't lava bubbles or garbage. I'll be placing both of these in tier 3. Sticking with murdering Mario for now, we have the cannon. These will shoot out cannonballs and can even be attached to walls and ceilings, along with having the angle of their shots change. Once again, these are just a nice obstacle, but they aren't too terribly helpful otherwise. Plus the airship theme in 3D World doesn't fit very well with cannons like the main 4 styles do. I'm putting this just below the fire stuff in tier 3. Vines sadly don't slaughter the player, so instant bottom tier for them. Alright, I'm just kidding, though that doesn't mean the vines are very useful. In the main 4 styles, they're used to let Mario climb straight upward, which is a very useful mechanic. However, 3D World has trees which functionally act pretty similar. While trees can't be placed in question mark blocks like vines can, you pretty much don't need vines at all. They are kind of helpful for aesthetics, but so are trees. I'd still be happy to see them though, so I'll place them just above the Boob Buddies in tier 3. Lifts are sort of weird. The normal variation basically has a 1-to-1 recreation in 3D World with the cloud lifts, but the blue lifts don't really have anything. These will fall when Mario jumps on them, making them very useful platforming tools. If placed on tracks, they'll also only start moving once Mario jumps on them. Now yes, there are blue track blocks in 3D World that only move when Mario lands on them, however there's nothing that just falls straight down like the blue lift. For how useful of a platforming tool this is, I think it deserves to be in tier 2 just above the Goombrat. The lava lift on the other hand isn't really that helpful, not even in the main 4 styles. It's basically just the track block from 3D World. It's only really useful as a faster lift when on a track, but even then, a blue lift with wings does the job good enough. The main usage I get out of this item is for decoration, though since 3D World is in 3D, I doubt they'd let us place lava lifts over top of terrain like you can in the main styles. So I'm gonna be placing this at the top of the bottom tier. It's really not something I'd get excited for at all. Oh, also mini rant, why on earth are the hitboxes for this thing slightly bigger than 4 tiles wide? It makes it possible to activate them even if they are completely covered in ground. Okay, last platform for the video, we have the Seesaw. These will lean based on the weight put on it, which is decently helpful in both platforming and more complex contraptions for measuring weight. For example, maybe Mario could be locked out of a part of the level until something heavy, like your mom, is placed on the other side to lift it up. I'm gonna place this right under Laka II in tier 3, certainly a step up from the lava lift. Our next 2 items may be a bit controversial, those being the grinder and bumper. The grinder will damage Mario if he comes in contact with it, and the bumper will bounce Mario off of it in whatever direction he jumped into it from. These are both pretty helpful obstacles. The saw is especially good as not only does it damage Mario, but he can even walk through it, which does make it pretty different from spike traps. What really makes these items though, especially the bumper, is a unique property that these have that no other item really shares. The bumper only bounces Mario, meaning that literally anything else is able to go through it. Actually Luigi, Toad, and Toadette can't either. Stop deceiving your audience, Odyssey. You're going to lose all your subscribers, including me. Anyways, this is super useful, as it can make portions of your level completely off limits to you, but open for anything else. This means you can make places to say drop an item off, have a place for enemies to spawn in from, and so on. The saw is also helpful at this, though Mario can still damage boost through it. The saw already is useful enough though, so I think it's fair to put both of these items in the top tier for their unique properties that 3D World entirely lacks right now. A little less useful of a gizmo though is the Skewer. This will basically have a spike pillar slam in any direction after a set bit of time. This works decently as an obstacle and can even be good for timers, but that's all it's really good for. You can make timers well enough in 3D World anyway though, so I think this belongs just above the Boob Buddies in tier 3. The claw is another kind of weird one to talk about. It's able to grab things and even act as a sort of rope that Mario can swing on. It's only really helpful though if tracks exist, which 3D World lacks. I'm not entirely sure how to rank this because without the ability to transport objects, it's only really useful as a niche platforming tool, and I mean very niche. I think I'll put this item just above the bridges in tier 3. But now we have 2 of the big ones. These are not only some of the most useful gizmos in the game, but are also 2 of the most baffling exclusions. First off, we have the one-way wall. As the name suggests, you're able to run through the wall on one side, but can't on the other. This can also be set in all 4 main directions as well, which is really what makes this item useful. Being able to restrict players or other elements from going backwards or from entering an area they aren't supposed to is incredibly helpful in basically every level type. 3D World really only has a semi-solid platform for this, which of course only works in one direction. That makes creating much of anything in this style a massive pain, so I think it goes without saying that this belongs at the top of the list. I'm even putting it above shells because at least those have a decent replacement with the spike ball. The semi-solid platform can barely count as a replacement for one-way walls. But what might just be an even bigger exclusion are the tracks. These let you completely customize the path certain items take, which is helpful for a number of things. You can use this in platforming levels to direct a lift, you can use it to keep enemies in place, you can use it for timers, and so much more. There is literally nothing that comes even close to replicating the track's functionality functionality in 3D World. The thing is though, there's zero reason for tracks not to be here. Not only are they literally in Super Mario 3D World, but due to some glitches, people discovered the tracks are fully programmed and functional in the game style. All they had to do was model it, and this game style would be significantly better. This goes for most items on the list, by the way. It really seems like Nintendo just got lazy with most of these. With that said, I'm putting this at the very top, since you can technically make one-ways as semi-solids. But yeah, let's hope Nintendo decides to put in a little bit more effort into Mario Maker 3's 3D World style, if that game ever comes. But anyways, that's it for this video. Are you all mad that you can't crush a skip squeak with a skewer? Let me know in the comments. I know this video was a bit shorter than my last few, but I'm trying to get this video out before I start to get real busy again. I'm happy I was able to mostly stick to a weekly schedule during the summer though. The last month especially has been huge for the channel, so thank you all so much for already getting me to 110,000 subscribers. But that's enough rambling from me. Dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.